masterpiece. It's really brought in the energy in the hall. Thank you. So welcome back, and we're now moving towards our second plenary of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this plenary session, Ms. Sumedha. Sumedha is the country director of IPartner India with a vast experience of governance, women empowerment, participative development at local, regional, and global level. Please welcome Sumedha and her panel, Chauvin from UNDP, Priyanka Jain from Aajeevika, Marissa Wesely from Win-Win Strategies, Elianna Sabbag, Chann, Sitha, and Sandeep Kumar from Sodexo.
Thank you very much. What a great start to the session. What a high energy. Half the job done. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be given this opportunity to moderate this session. We are 1.5 days through the workshop, through the international conference, and what enriching panels and plenaries that we have had in the last 1.5 days. And after each plenary, you know, you always keep thinking what new thoughts have come in. Some of them, the old ones, have got reiterated, and some ideas have been left to ponder over. There are no agreement or disagreements, but for you to ponder over, think over. And I'm sure the next 1.5 days will also be great. So thank you very much. We have a very diverse panel here, and I'm very proud to say we also have the largest panel here as of now. 6 speakers from 4 countries, 3 continents, and across sectors. So we have from the UN, we have from the civil society, from the corporate sector, so it can't be better than that. We are also diverse in terms of gender, so we have 2 men as well on the panel, which is great to have. Thank you very much, Kumar and Sandeep. Before we go further, I also wanted to, because this session talks about markets and talks about creating jobs from vulnerable to valuable. And in terms of the disruptors for market, when I came yesterday morning and today morning, and I'm sure all of you also noticed that when you come near India Habitat Center, suddenly you see a surge of Sakha cabs. You know, there are at least 4 or 5 which I noticed yesterday and today as well. There's a moment of pride which you feel at that time. You know, that we have disrupted the market efficiently now. You know, we are visible there, it's there, out there. So, like Sakha, there are other players here as well who have very silently, powerfully, and confidently disrupted the existing market space. And before we start, if we can have one round of applause for Sakha and all those market players. Thank you very much. The speakers here have requested that they would like to introduce themselves, so I would not take the liberty of introducing them. But also I would like to say that during the session, the format is that we would be asking questions and responding to them. And we'll also leave adequate time for the house to ask questions from the speakers. From the last session, one of the things, so the mandate was to look at how do you create jobs which from vulnerable to valuable, and how do you create gender sensitive markets. But listening to Hope, I think we should also add the whole aspect of happiness into that, and also how do markets have a soul. Because just gender sensitivity may or may not be enough, but happiness is a very important criteria. I think we should also focus somewhere or the other in our discussions and having a soul for the markets. So could I please request Clement, if you can introduce yourself and your work, and then we go to the questions.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. So my name is Clement, I'm working for UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. And as part of UNDP, we have a project called DISHA, which is funded by IKEA Foundation, and that focuses on women economic empowerment. So we are working in 5 states and trying to actually support women in terms of career guidance and counseling, employment opportunity, and entrepreneurship.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka. I'm from an organization called Aajeevika Bureau. We work in the western part of the country with laboring communities, migrant communities. With women workers, our work mainly focuses on sectors like construction, manufacturing, agriculture, Narega, etc., which are some of the biggest employers of women, particularly poor women, Dalit Adivasi women in the country. And our effort in the last 2 years has been to sort of sit and study and learn about their work and living conditions and see what can be done along with women's kind of platforms themselves, using our existing kind of experience in legal aid and financial education and primary healthcare and occupational health, etc. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marissa. You heard from me yesterday, so I won't say much, but I co-founded and lead an organization called Win-Win Strategies, which works to connect the power of business with the deep assets of local women's organizations to work on economic empowerment strategies for women and girls globally, really helping companies appreciate complex, nuanced versions of economic empowerment that involve multiple facets and ecosystem approaches, and working with local organizations to help them really appreciate how to be effective, develop effective corporate engagement strategies and work with the corporate sector.
Hi, I'm Elianna. I wear a couple of hats coming here today. My first hat is I'm part of an association in Geneva called Giving Women, which is supports projects for women and girls by giving them an opportunity to be supported by women philanthropists in Geneva. This is how we came to know the Azad Foundation, as this is one of our projects many years ago. But it's also how I came to understand many of the issues affecting women and girls globally. And my second hat is one of where I've been working to support mothers in transition, so mothers who are trying to navigate the difficult landscape of work and life, and starting in Geneva, but particularly looking at the structural, cultural, and personal issues that affect women. We've been trying to address how to retell the story of motherhood, also how to talk about career breaks in a different way, and valuing the work of mothers inside and outside the home. Our most recent project is really to develop an app which will measure how mothers are using their time at home and be able to then use that as a tool to educate business about the value that women are gaining during career breaks. I'm also a mother of 3 young girls, so I also have a big responsibility to tell the story in a different way, to model good behavior, and again, to leave space for men to fill gaps and take on caring roles.
Hi, I'm Chann from Cambodia, and I work for the Worker Information Center, which is mainly working with the textiles and footwear industry worker. We are the Women Government-Based Association. And our main work mainly empowers the women worker to critically analyze the condition that they are in, whether it's politically, socially, and economically, and then work collectively with the women-led initiative to address the issues that matter them the most. We also part of the United Sisterhood Alliance, which is the alliance consists of 4 institutions, where we also engage with the sex worker and entertainment worker, but also with farmers and the community that actually affect largely by the investment, and then work collectively on challenging both the invisible and challenging powers, and also informal structure as well as formal structure, which actually we call it trade and investment structures and policy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sandeep Kumar, and I represent a company called Sodexo. We are one of the largest in the area of integrated facility management, and we are world's 19th largest employer. We employ close to around 4.5 lakhs people across the 72 countries, and we are one of the few companies in our segment which has 54% females and only 46% males. So I think we deserve a big round of applause for this. Unfortunately, take 2, when I come to India, since it's a true reflection of our society and our country, we are just hovering around 20%. So in different parts of the world, how women are treated at the workplace is reflected in these numbers. And we are trying to reach in India by 2020 at 30%. That's our target. We have all types of jobs, and I know many of you are creating skilled manpower who can be employed, and that is one of my agenda here, to tell that we are very aggressively hiring, and we are very aggressively hiring women folks across the world and particularly in India. But the struggle is tough. Inch by inch, day by day, we have to move ahead, because we get a lot of resistance because there is a lot of stereotype, and like the video which was just shown, that we need washroom. We also go and tell our clients, because we work at our client's place, that for our women we need separate washrooms, right? So I could identify with that. I'm very thrilled, and I definitely would like to have a copy of that video. So so that's my company's introduction, and I take care of HR for the India operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. Could I ask my first question to Priyanka and Sandeep? This is basically regarding skilling, and as we see that in the recent trends in our government, especially in India, the government skill building program, companies through their CSR programs, NGOs through their projects are investing a lot in skill building for women. It could be in the traditional domains and some also in the non-traditional domains. But a lot of efforts are being put there through funding. My question to both of you is that how relevant are these skills to, and how aligned are these skills to the market needs? Priyanka, would you like to go first, and then Sandeep?
Or since you have asked for the relevance, let me start, because I represent the industry, which is the creating the demand. Maybe she is creating the supply. Okay. So yeah, so partially yes and partially no. Many of the programs which the government is running or funding are designed in partnership with the corporates. Like we represent the sector called Tourism and Hospitality Skill Council. So when we were writing the qualification packs, which is the syllabus of these training programs, we were invited to write these syllabus. It was not imposed on us. So exactly what we want in the industry. So for example, you take housekeeping, or you take any kitchen helper who is required in a kitchen to cut and prepare, do the mise en place for the cook. Earlier, government had some vocational training centers, and they had some 1930s kind of syllabus, right? But they understood that it varies from site to site and geography to geography, and India is a very vast country, and that's why we were invited to co-create those syllabus. So that is a good thing which the government has done through NSTC and other agencies. The problem is majorly in the implementation of that. So how much it is getting translated into real skilling is a big challenge. It varies from agency to agency, and it varies from geography to geography. Because there are some states which are the feeder states in India. Like if you look around the country, we have close to 67% of our migrant workers who are doing these kind of jobs are coming from 8 states. These are Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, Odisha, Assam, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, and I think one of them I'm missing. So, so these 67 states are feeding to rest of the states where the jobs are there. Rest of the states don't bother to create those skills, because those people are not ready to work. Like in Delhi, if you want a housekeeper, you will not get a Delhiite doing a housekeeping job. He must be from those states. Now here, a male folk is ready to migrate. He's easily migrating. Females are struggling. Unless her husband is also ready to come, she is not able to come. So the jobs, where the jobs are and where the skills are getting created, that is the gap which we are really struggling with.
Priyanka, would you also like to contribute to that? And also, you were not here yesterday, but like one of the speakers commented that skilling is killing if you don't get a job. So also if there's something which gels with your experience as well.
Sure, sure. So let me begin with our experience from Rajasthan, which is one of the areas where we've worked the most. And what we see over there with the state's kind of skilling sort of mandate is that in the urban areas with girls sort of from urban spaces, they're sort of being trained in sectors like the hospitality industry, air hostessing, a little bit of computer training, and sort of to take up secretary jobs. And the numbers show that there is some placement. Now, if you look at the rural areas, girls are still being trained in tailoring and ad hoc kind of computer training, and one wonders what happens after that. I think the first point to note is that large sections of girls that we're talking about are from rural areas, and we haven't done what needs to be done to create rural markets in the first place. Now, the second question is, Sandeep spoke about whether skilling is market friendly or not. I think a question that must be asked parallelly is whether the skilling program is women friendly or not. So these jobs that are being created in the hotel industry, what are the work conditions? And one knows that even in the formal sector, even with big kind of hotels, these work conditions can be really bad. So what about the small hotels where these girls are going? So there are too many questions that are being asked about whether women are working or not working. We need to ask what the industry is doing to make it a better place for sort of women to be there, and what the skilling program, whether the skilling program is asking industry those questions. We've been in several forums where there's a lot of discussion with industry on skill training is the main kind of central pillar of labor welfare, but there's no discussion around what industry can do to make this a better place for women to work in. The second thing about the program is the way it is designed. It has led to the mushrooming of these placement agencies, these intermediaries, which basically have no prior background in skill training, have no basis in kind of women's movement, etc. So what is happening right now is that it's become a numbers game. So the placement agency gets money only after it shows that X number of girls have been placed and they've been retained in their jobs, let's say for 3 months. So this has kind of led to a lot of perverse incentives. So we know through some of the work that we did in partnership in Odisha, that about 35 girls were trained in sort of tailoring, and then they were taken to a factory, to a footwear factory somewhere in Delhi, and they were just dumped there without any information. They tried to leave because the conditions were really horrible, but the placement agency refused to take them back because unless the women stay there for 3 months, they won't get their money from the skill training program. So this is, of course, maybe an extreme example, but the point is that with all of this money, what is exactly happening? How has this been sort of designed, and is it too much a numbers game more than anything else? I think the third and the final point very quickly is what is skill and what is lack of skill. We need to kind of question these categories of skill and lack of skill. So say, for example, in the construction sector, one of the biggest employers of women in this country, our research suggests that women are carrying 5,000 kgs on their head without any aids in one day. So 50 kgs of cement stacks, tokeries, etc., and they go up and down all day, navigating India's construction sites, which have the highest rate of accidents in the world. So shaky platforms, all kinds of things, and they survive, they do that work. They do that for minimum wages, unequal wages. How is that not skilled? Because that in Olympics you'd get a gold medal for. So again, when we say unskilled, we need to skill up. Are we falling into the trap of capitalism and what capitalism does to devalue women's work? Yeah.
Thank you, Priyanka. That was very thought-provoking. Yes, Elianna, you want to comment?
I just wanted to make a comment about what's happening in Europe. in terms of an industry response. There's a movement now that's beginning to take hold, and it's actually companies, multinationals who are taking this on, many banks and large corporations who are beginning to recognize the cost of losing women after when they leave for their maternity leave. And they're offering now returnships, which are actually on-the-job skilling opportunities, mostly designed to increase their technological, so catching them up on the changes in technology, but also coupled with coaching and mentoring to increase the confidence of women that they may have lost during career breaks. And this is now being seen in about more than 160 companies around the world, and I think is a nice opportunity for both business and women. And it's really based on a business case. It's not, although some governments are investing in it, it's really something that's coming from business.
Thank you, Elianna. Going to the formal workspace, what we see is that if you look at the formal workspaces, between your experiences that you bring to the table here, are there any examples that you can share of workspaces which are gender sensitive and also workspaces which are gender insensitive? I'm sure there are many examples on that, but also if we can focus on some examples which are gender sensitive. And I would just change the sequencing, and maybe if Marissa, you would like to start on that. And then Clement, we could come, and Chann, and then we go to Sandeep at the end, because you've done a study, Sodexo has done a study on diverse teams, so at the end we could look at you.
Yes, I mean, I'm sorry. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, coming from New York and dealing largely with a lot of global companies, I would say that there is increasingly, just overarchingly, a growing sense among certainly progressive companies of the need for greater gender diversity, and at all levels, and that is driving a lot of rethinking in different ways, and really across value chains, of how to really engage with women in different ways. I think people recognize that it's a challenge, it's a structural challenge, it's a social cultural challenge, it's an attitude challenge. There are lots of challenges there, but some of the structural things that you're seeing are sort of building on some of the things that Gary was talking about this morning, are things like very extended parenting leave and caregiving leave, in the sense that it extends to elder care as well as child care, and it can be taken freely and for men and women, and over a large number of weeks. And governments, we've seen, are now actually moving into this space to try to encourage, and some companies as well, to encourage men to take that leave in an effort to sort of help shift the norms, because even though you can have these programs, if only women are taking them, you're not really shifting the sort of gender sensitivity in the workplace, and women are often sort of negatively treated for them if they're not, if men and women are not really dealt with equally, and the taking of leave is viewed with equally. So I think both governments and companies are getting into that space. I think the other area where you're seeing a lot of increased gender sensitivity is in the real recognition of the burden of unpaid care obligations, and which the leave part goes to as well, but also in terms of provision of child care. And while that certainly varies what makes sense in terms of child care, anyone will recognize varies from country to country and workplace to workplace. A number of companies have been trying to provide it in the U.S. Patagonia has been leading the way for many years by providing on-site childcare, which is highly expensive for all their employees, but they have found that they profess that they have a 25% lower turnover rate from this, which far from this and other policies, but it makes up for that. Starbucks recently implemented backup daycare for you have free 10 days of backup daycare. So if your child can't get to daycare, or something is going wrong at home, and whatever your care setup is not working, then you have somewhere for the child to go, which in a lot of places, like in urban centers where I work, that's very powerful. Or you can even pay $1 a day to have the care come at home. That's in partner with an NGO. So you see, I think unpaid care obligations are being recognized as a huge burden in terms of advancing women. And so beyond the sort of typical sort of mentoring and kinds of programs you see in corporate spaces, I think the more structural issues are there. And also more work, and the last thing I'll say, is moving into value chains as well, and where companies are increasingly recognizing that they need to work both in their with the supply chains, or they're working with their factories and working with women in the factories, and hopefully working with local organizations and trade unions and the women workers, who are the ones who can really define what's needed to make those workplaces safer, and working with the communities who are often recruiting into those workplaces. And I think this increased recognition and the need to work with local organizations is critical, and with the women workers is critical. But I think we're seeing different aspects of the challenges to get to true economic empowerment and greater gender equality play out in different ways in corporate settings.
Thank you, Marissa.
To give a few examples, that very specific one, in especially Indian one. Because the Indian context is quite specific as well. As everybody knows, the female workforce participation in India is very low, one of the lowest in the world, at around 20 to 25% at max. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The condition, the working condition in the workplace is one of them, definitely. The toilets, as we can see in the video, but separated toilets for girls actually is critical to make sure that women can work. So there are a few companies that are taking the lead. There are a few actually quite good examples. We were asking for some. One of them is one company that we work with, is actually GSL, Jindal Stainless Steel. They have a factory close by from here in Haryana, in Rohtak, 200 kilometers from here. Something like 2 years back, there was one woman working within the factory and the accounting department. We created with GSL a kind of a skill development program according to their needs. We actually mobilized directly from the community around. And as of now, there should be around 70 women actually working on the factory floor, out of 500 employees. So again, passing from 1 to 70 kind of. So that was a big shift. The shift for the company was actually very huge, because it's not only in terms of creating a skill development program, but it's actually the whole infrastructure that they had to change. They had to create these toilets separated for girls. They had to do a huge communication, internal communication campaign, sensitization campaign for the male co-workers, to make sure that they could actually accept that women they're going to come, that women they're going to work, that they could that in terms of language, abusive language in the workplace, and other sharing spaces in the canteen, the cafeteria, etc. So it's a long process. It took mostly 2 years to actually do so. It's a kind of a big shift. On the other side, what's very important as well, and when you work on the program of women economic empowerment that we have and try to place girls in job, it's not only in the workplace, which is actually quite critical to make sure that there is this conducive environment, but it's also outside of the workplace, which is actually critical. And especially parents, and as everybody knows, the social norm in India being what they are quite present, and the pressure from the parents is huge. Making sure that the parents could also accept, the parents, the family, and the community could accept that the girl could go and work. It's not only making sure that there is this safe environment in the workplace, but also outside of the workplace. Everything that deals with safe accommodation, safe transportation is critical. Even in what we did with GSL, at some point, some of the girls, they had to resign and not accept the job, because the shifts during winter time was finishing around 5 or 6 p.m. or something, which is already dark, and the family didn't want the girl to actually come back home if it was dark, because it was not safe from them. So we had to deal, and we worked with the Haryana government, and we put up a kind of a bus that was collecting the girl directly from the doorstep and bringing them to the factory. But as I said, it's not that easy. It's a lot, and it's not by thinking that just the infrastructure in the workplace is done, and it's more women and gender friendly that everything is done. There are a lot of other things around that goes from the family, and a lot of safety element that needs to be taken into consideration to make sure that women can actually participate fully in the workforce.
Thank you, Clément. Chann, would you like to come in on this question?
Yeah, I would actually have a hard time to find example around the gender sensitive in the industry where I work. And I'm sorry to the moderator, but also to the whole group here, because we are working with the industry where 90% are women, but there's no actually kind of like gender sensitive, even we already largely women. One of the key reason I think that we also have question is how does that happen, despite, you know, we have a challenge in terms of number, but we have quite largely number in the industry, but we still not get it. In terms of access to the social security, protections, and fair treatment in the workplace, wage, and others, health issues, especially reproductive health. And that's even we haven't actually really talked further around harassment that include physicals and also sexual harassment at the workplace. So that I think one of the key questions that we still continue to ask. And then I think we also looking at in terms of this industry and this market is not determined by us. We brought into it. And we try to actually mainstream ourselves into the market industry that is not defined or actually valued by ourselves. So we brought in a way that we are actually constructed that this is a deep value work because it doesn't actually give much because it's associated with the work that the women do at home. Because textile and footwear industry stitching is also the women's actually taking it. So because of that, it doesn't value in terms of money. So that's, I think, is the whole shift of questioning who value our work and how do we value it in terms of money or non-capital. So I think it's a very challenging work that we are trying to address. So we're still struggling, and I'll talk a little bit more around what the interventions in the next question. But again, I wanted to say that the morning panel is really discussing about ecosystem. And we have to really questioning hard who defining economy, who determine it, where's the women in that, and how are we actually value and respect diversity in terms of physical, in terms of skill, in terms of potential, in terms of knowledge, background and story into that space. Otherwise, I think we will still face a lot of challenging that trying to actually making ourselves, educating ourselves into the system that actually, exploiting us the most, including the labor and also natural resources. I think it's again, I have a conversations around when we talk about the changing of rule of game, we have to really define what rule we are talking about. What game are we struggling? Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to actually make the intervention right, to really find fair and justice for women.
Thank you, Jen. Sandeep, Sodexo has done a study on the importance of having diversity in teams. Would you like to say briefly about that?
Yeah, so in fact, this is the second phase. I mean, we did it twice. We commissioned a study, and there are some very interesting findings which are good for business and good for the society. So the key findings are that the ideal spot is around 40% women and 60% men across the world. And if you have that, 50-50 normally should be, but the data shows that 40-60 is the best ratio. Number two is the advantages of having a good gender ratio is you will have higher profitability, you will have higher employee engagement, and you will have higher client retention. The clients will remain with you for a longer period, and so this was done for close to in all continents for close to around 100 odd companies, and this is what is the result. So very encouraging results, which advocates that we need to push for higher gender diversity and more of inclusion, like what you're talking about, creating the right workplace, the safe workplace, so that they feel at home, they feel safe, and they contribute. Because half of the time, if they are worried about their safety, how can they contribute? The other dimension to that is, as you rightly said, Sitha, is you need to look at women at all the levels. So the companies which are being led by females, they are doing better in terms of all these parameters. Companies which have higher ratio at the board level, they are doing better. Companies which are having higher senior leadership, global leadership with more females, they are doing better, because they have, over a period of time, they have created a very safe and productive environment for everybody to contribute. And the question started with that organized versus unorganized. So I would like to comment upon that also. See, we have lots of women who are working, but the official statistics are not showing that ratio. We are saying that in India, in my industry, only 20% people are working, but it's not true, because majority of them are working in unorganized sector. Even in construction sector, you are not counting them. Yeah. So moving to the organized sector is the right recipe from an organized sector. That's what I think you started with. So yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep. Elianna, I have a small question to you, and you can also contribute more. Is also when we look at the formal sector, because we're still talking about the formal sector, and you talked about returnships, and we also we have heard about flexible hours, and women getting to work from home and all those areas. Is there also an extra load on women, or is it a boon for them? Is it a bane or a boon? Because from some experiences, I also feel that at times women have to give in a lot. From what they have been given, they have to also given a lot. So nobody is taking away their responsibilities of childcare or caregiving, whereas the companies are saying that you can do the same work within these parameters and be very grateful for that. It's not a right, but it's like a thing that you are being given on a platter for you to be grateful for. I may be wrong, but you know better on that.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think there's a couple dimensions to this. We're focusing a lot on how to accommodate the caregiving responsibilities of mothers, and in fact, as we talk about maternity leave, and and that's becoming something that's much more generalized. I think that the solution lies actually much more in a parental leave solution, where the leave is non-transferable. So the men don't take it, then they don't. It gets lost. And I think that what I would urge even further than that is that when parental leave is accorded, and there's a possibility, and the men have the option, sort of father leave, that they take it early on, because I would argue that the gender roles at home are defined very early on when the baby comes home. And if the father is not present to understand the responsibilities and the challenges that the mother is facing, and sometimes even when there's postpartum depression or there's some major challenges that the mother is facing, that the father is not aware of this at the early stages and those roles are not defined early on, then I think this is where we come into some major challenges. But there's also a big opportunity to really define the roles more effectively at the outset. So that would be one thing. I think, we work too hard to try and accommodate the caring roles of mothers rather than trying to challenge the roles and responsibilities at home. And I don't want to put all of this responsibility on the mothers, but I think we do need to ask and put ourselves out there on the one hand. The other solution that we've brought to market, me in collaboration with some other people I've handed over now, is a solution of with more flexi hours and many more entrepreneurs, many more self-employed people as well. Mothers often choose self-employment as a solution because they need the flexibility. So, but we have also many people who are working more in co-working spaces. And so one solution we brought to market is actually a co-working space with a daycare on site. And this is for parents, not just for mothers, so that parents can come with their child and work freely and have also contact with their child throughout the day, so that the separation between work and life becomes much more human. So I think those are the comments I wanted to add.
Thank you, Elianna. Yes, very briefly, please.
Yeah, so in fact, some of the interesting developments which India has created is in the caregiving or the creche facility. The law is telling that any employer which has 50 employees has to have a creche facility. It's not that 50 female employees. Earlier you used to have that you need to have 50 female employees. Now they are saying father has equal responsibility of rearing a child. So father can as well bring the child to the creche. Why are you loading it only on the mother? And with both the couple working together, I think there is a good advancement in terms of sharing the responsibility. That's a welcome sign, which I can see all around.
Thank you. Going to the informal sector now, which is a large population worldwide as well as in India. Worldwide, if you look at the statistics, about 75% of women are in the informal sector. And within India, about 90% of women who work outside home are in the informal sector. And that's a large area. These women are contributing a lot to the economy, but they are still the invisible workers in many ways. So what are your thoughts on improvising the workspace for women in the informal sector, both in terms of decent jobs, remunerations? Looking at the example looking at the session in the morning from Nepal, we heard about how they are trying to incorporate social security for women in the informal sector, which is something which we have not even started doing in India as of now. And even globally, I don't know how much have we achieved on that. Also, there were comments yesterday about why do we have to demarcate between formal and informal space? Why can't informal be formal and why can't formal be informal? So a workspace is a workspace for a woman. But in an informal sector, she loses on social security, the mentorship, and all those angles. So, and also, can trade unions play a role in that? Because right now, trade unions and workers' association traditionally have been playing a role in the formal sector. So, could I request Priyanka and Sitha to respond on that, and if others want to join, they could do that later.
Okay. So maybe I'll begin by sort of looking at the labor movement space, and from there try to work towards how could we possibly sort of respond. And I do that because if you look at the state in India, and there's a lot of literature out there which says that, it's not isolated from our patriarchal mindset. The norms that you speak of, the gender insensitivity that we speak of, it's very much in the implementation machinery. So that might not be an obvious place for gender justice as it is. Then if you look at the industry and if you look at labor markets, and especially in the informal sector, we know that they're corrosive. We know that they're extractive in nature, in construction, in factories, manufacturing. So where do you begin? Which is why a lot of people turn to the labor movement and to the trade unions for sort of the way out. But the challenge in India is, in at least 2002, and I think now the figures might have actually gotten worse, only 8% of the workforce was actually in the trade, in the sort of registered trade union, within which women were highly underrepresented, between 5 to 20%. Even though now the trade unions have a women's wing, there's a lot of documentation which says that women's issues kind of remain marginal, sort of remain special interest, and not in the main agenda of these trade unions. Now, of course, there's a lot that has happened in the informal space with SEVA and a lot of other kind of collectives of domestic workers that have sort of occupied the space a little bit outside of the central trade unions and are trying to, bring forth the issues of women. But whenever, there's a mixed, if it's a women-only space, it becomes a natural space for women to kind of develop their power and their agency and their voice. But if it's a mixed trade-based kind of collective, like the construction sector, both men and women, then again we kind of fall back into the same sort of issues. So in our own sort of work, we also have like a registered trade union that our organization has facilitated, and it has about 1,600 construction workers, migrant workers, largely Adivasi. And we found that it's similarly bad, underrepresentation, no one in the leadership, and the discourse is very sort of male-dominated. So one of the ways that we tried was to find out ways and tools and methods through which women can very precisely talk about why they feel extracted, and how much and what their work burden is, not just at the labor market, but also all the additional unpaid work that they have to do. So we did a study along with them, and then women, had all of this evidence in their hand. They knew that they walk 10 kilometers in a day. They carry 5,000 kgs in a day. They work 17 hours. 5 hours of that is unpaid work. 3.5 hours is because the state does not provide water and sanitation, so they have to walk 45 minutes. There's unpredictability, there's insecurity, and all of that women assume into their bodies, right? All the stress, all the tension, the cognitive energy, mental, physical energy. Now, armed with all of this, we started a discussion within that collective through, through a range of meetings where the women were talking to their co-workers, who are their husbands, brother-in-laws, father-in-laws, because that's where actually patriarchy starts. And over there was this contestation and back and forth, and men felt really upset that we are, saying that we are making their women carry so much. And then it was really with a lot of skill that women engaged with all of those contestations. Some of them got angry, some of them yelled, some of them were very tactful. So, different women had different strategies. And after like intensive kind of back and forth, we saw that the room was suddenly turning around. And over a period of time, that collective now, its agenda has kind of moved on beyond the previous agenda. Now they're talking about issues like bathrooms, which might be very intuitive to us, but within the labor movement, nobody talks about bathrooms. So that's the thing. First of all, how do we make the workers' platforms a space which are gender sensitive? From that, this collective has now gone, sort of like done a lot of powerful policy advocacy with the municipality, with the BOCW board. They've gotten themselves water kind of facilities, toilets and health camps, etc., etc. It's still tricky when it comes to the industry in these particular spaces. Who do you speak to? Who is the industry? Because you are dealing with a petty contractor. You don't know who the builder is. You don't even know who the employer in the factory is. And there are a lot of structural changes happening in the economy. If you look at labor laws, and I think one of the things that we need to do in these kinds of solidarity groups is to look at labor laws and see what's happening over there. So the Equal Remuneration Act in India says that women have the right to equal pay, but also equal opportunity to work, which says that the employer cannot say that I will not hire a woman for this particular job. It happens all the time, but it can be challenged legally. If you look at the wage code which is being proposed today, and the government is trying very hard to push it in the parliament before the elections, it has the equal pay for equal work, but it has very silently taken out the equal opportunity to work, which means you can legally today say that I don't want to hire a woman for this particular job. So do we have the methods to call out the sneaky ways in which patriarchy works in industry, in state, and inside of households? How do we give power to women's own politics, women's own, and unfortunately puts the burden on women, but how do we engage in those kind of processes as the way to move forward? Simply because it's just so pervasive, and it can be so hard to talk about why women feel extracted or why women have this kind of labor burden. Yeah.
Priyanka, Sitha?
Yeah, I really very echo what Priyanka mentions, because we are working in the formal industry, so-called, but still it's a lot of challenges. So again, I come back to why we call or name it formal or informal. It's a question. Was it because of the law that is regulated? For example, in the textile industry, it's become formal because it's an export industry. So you have the code, the labors, and all of that. But then we haven't actually questioned the whole global supply chain. When we are inviting the foreign direct investment into our country, we are actually deregulating our national policy to give so much incentive to the investor, to the corporate, and so little to our own people. And was that, and the workplace is not safe. And even we are in a formal economy, the women that we are facing, I have a study that outside there, that how conditioned at the workplace and also outside of the workplace. Because the minimum wage is set, but it's set without the women participation. And we have to also critique the union as well, because in this industry, largely 90% are women, but the leadership of the union, 90% are men. So the women's voice and women agendas are not there to negotiate. So, and there are a lot of things beyond just money can be resolved. So wage is one thing. So there's a lot of issues around the campaign and around wage. But every time we observe that in our conditions, when the wage getting increased, the cost of living is also increased. So we have to also actually questioning about the purchasing power. Inflation, who controlling that? Even we earn $500 a month or $1,000 a month, we still cannot actually keep up with the cost of living because everything is privatized. Part of the system of the trade and investment policy is the agenda of neoliberalization, which is privatize the public services. Education was being privatized, security has been privatized, health has been privatized, so everything is paid. We have to pay for that. And it's very, very difficult. That's why we have to push for, again, the social security and also social protection and the public services to be back in the hand of the public. The government doesn't do anything. And they can say that they have a whole lot of social protection flaw and policy, but they said there's no money. But where does the money? Because there's no tax. In the investment law, there's exemption of import and export tax. But who benefit? Is it our government? Is it our country? or the corporatist benefit. So it comes to a question also around who are we also need to actually questioning about accountability. Yeah, it's corporate accountability is also very important. I mean, yes, I echo Marissa, which mentioned about there's engagement with the Women Association, and also grassroots, but through the work that we be engaging, does the corporate also actually monitor and questioning and engaging with their factory supplier to actually ensure that their code of conduct that presents so well has been actually really implemented? Because it's very important to have a mechanism to monitor conditions so that those conditions are actually being enforced in their supply factory and ensuring that the women actually working in a safe place. Second is around issues about, if we really want to actually looking at the change, is around the issues about collective power. We don't have the bargaining of power at the moment. And when we talk about the feminists, it's also talk about the power relationship and how we exercise the power. Look at the situation right now, I think in other places, but mainly in my country. Any law, any policy that created is to shrinking the space of the civic. It's actually make it difficult to unionize, make it the workers to become very difficult, and the industry like now become, our formal industry is get into informal. Why? Because there's a lot of subcontract and sweatshop in this supply, which is the worker think that they are now in the informal, they are more flexible because they can work from home, but they are not entitled to the national social security benefit, the minimum wage that they have to be guaranteed, the safe conditions, and other access to benefit that be entitled in the formal economy that being actually granted by the law. So I think it's a whole lot of kind of like question, how do we organize and have the collective bargaining, and who's sitting in that table to decide in terms of the economy, in terms of industry, in terms of the working condition, and also labor law or any other law, because law can be actually reform or change in the benefit of who actually being there at the table. So I still feel like it's very challenging because the law in our country at the moment can be changed in a night, tomorrow, without even asking the question. Those who actually impact hugely around those kind of like policy and law. And again, I would say that without having this collective bargaining power, and if it's not even have to be stated by the law or not, we have to really claim it. Because I think we're also bound by a lot of everything have to be legal, have to be law, have to be in the frame, which is we are not in that space to define it. Why should we still continue to accept that?
Thank you, Chann. Marissa, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. First of all, I completely agree with you in terms of the monitoring in terms of factories and the role that the global companies have. And I think that there's increasingly, at least in a lot of the developed world, and increasingly with pressure from some employees and from customers to see more of that, at least on global publicly traded companies. I think the challenge has become much more when you move beyond those companies, who don't have a lot of the investor pressure, the employee pressure, the customer pressure to sort of look more, but that is an ongoing challenge. The other thing I would say, well, I agree with you about the sort of vacuum in a public role in, and this is true in the United States for sure, in terms of healthcare, in terms of greater social protections, childcare, all of these things, huge vacuum. Things that these roles that we think that the government should play have a much greater role in. At the same time, I would say that on the plus side, what we're also seeing, and I said this yesterday, is some of these large companies actually stepping in and taking on much more progressive role policies than the governments are, and pushing them and pushing the U.S. government in issues of transgender rights or reproductive health and supporting healthcare on those things and providing healthcare and providing pensions. I think what the private sector really needs to do as the world moves into a more technology provides more flexibility and more part-time work and all these things is how to, the since government needs to do this too, but I think it's also there's a role for the private sector to start providing some of these worker protections to their sort of full-time employees. Move away from the informal, formal description and talk about what rights people have regardless of what their work is and how you define where we're going to move forward, and then figure out who's going to provide that, whether it is private sector, whether it's government, and look at it that way.
Thank you, Marissa. I think what you are saying resonates a lot with the Indian context as well, and I think globally, even in South Asia, in many of these countries. Related to the informal sector is also the space for women entrepreneurs. Sometimes we use the word interchangeably, but women entrepreneurs is a different domain altogether. And if you look at the domain of non-traditional livelihood and the spaces that women are entering into as entrepreneurs, what are your thoughts on that? Is that, again, in terms of, as entrepreneurs, many of them silently are being promoted to become entrepreneurs because the formal spaces are shrinking for women in some areas, and some they're expanding as well. So is it a good deal for them because they have a more self-esteem, maybe you could say, independence, flexible hours and all of that? Or is it something that they get further marginalized because of the lack of mentorship, lack of, again, social security like in the informal sector, lack of support structure, benefits, all of that? Because a workspace also offers some kind of a togetherness, you know, for like in the earlier panel they were talking about the whole storytelling, the sharing about your stories, what is happening in your life. In entrepreneurship, all of that may be missing. So what are your thoughts? And if I could request first, if Clement, if you could go first, and then Elianna and Marissa, if you could contribute, and if the others want to contribute later, we could.
For sure. To be that first, perhaps to unpack a bit what we understand by entrepreneur, because there are many different of them. The young girls from an urban area, from a more upper middle class that want to get into a startup, to a woman from a rural places that doesn't have any other choice than actually have an income generating activity. It's the world of a difference. And it does not require the same kind of a support or intervention neither. So there are different kind of them. Just to take, certainly for us and for us at the UN, the most marginalized one, that would be more on the side of the what we call the necessity entrepreneur, meaning to say that they don't have any other choice. Understanding that a woman in any rural corner of the country in India will be barely literate. She won't have the education requirement to get into any kind of formal job. That's just impossible. She would have dropped out from school if ever she went to school. Drop out from school at age 8, 10 at max, and she won't be able to get into a job. On top of that, the social norm being what they are in the country, and we were speaking about unpaid care work. She is the one dealing with everything anyway, so she doesn't have the time neither to get into a formal employment. We did that as part of the DISHA project. We actually trained women in stitching, placed them in some textile factory, but the factory was 15 kilometers away from their place of living. It takes an hour and a half to go, an hour and a half to come back, 8-hour shift, 8 to 9-hour shift in the factory. It's 12 hours outside the home. They were coming back at 8, 9 p.m., still the one dealing with the cooking, the cleaning and all that. It's not bearable, you can't do that, it's impossible. Nevertheless, there is still a few hours during the day that they could actually, and all of them are actually very interesting in starting their own kind of a small business. For that, what we've seen is that it's actually, you can't it's not only to start the business, which is actually important, but make sure that you can actually sustain and grow that business, which is the most difficult part. And for that, what you actually need is to have access to some kind of a support system. So one of the ideas that what we're working with is to see how we can create a network of mentors. Because it's not only to acquire some set of basic skill to start, basic business skill to start your business, but to sustain it, you actually need someone that can provide you actually to some kind of a support. So not only in terms of the business skill, but forward, backward linkages with financial institution or with market. And especially what we've seen, what's becoming more and more important, it's actually some kind of a psychological support. So it's somebody that can actually help you, and especially for women in rural area, for them to actually start their own business. It's not only about the market and not only about the skills, but it's actually about the confidence that they will have, and the confidence that they will have to stand in front of their husbands, the mother-in-law sometimes, as well as the community, and to say, okay, I want to take the risk. I know that I can do it, and I know that I can be successful. And having someone that you can relate to, that you can speak with, that can build your confidence, that can actually provide you with that psychological support, can go a long way in making sure that you create that support system around them.
Thank you, Clement. Marissa, Elianna, but little briefly if you would want to, because we are running out of time, we want to also open the floor for the questions before we go to the last.
Sure, I just wanted to just make a comment about, just with regards to mothers, that it is, I read a study recently that was showing that motherhood is actually the highest risk for bankruptcy. And you know, when you think about entrepreneurship, it's also a very high-risk undertaking. And I wanted to unpack just quickly also that, you know, there's various types of entrepreneurship that we see in North America and Europe, which are more to do with self-employment or starting an enterprise. And when self-employment, it's actually, you know, you are continuing a type of employment that you've done before, you're on your own, and that type of normally works pretty safely. The type that's more like about entrepreneurship is, I think, relating more to what Sumedha was talking about before, you know, that the support isn't there. But I think what's important is to remember that the financial security, the social security systems need to be in place, as particularly when women take career breaks, those things drop out, and over the long term, they're left much more vulnerable and at high risk of financial burden.
Marissa, you want to contribute?
No, I do think that it is important to sort of distinguish. I agree with you that you need the sort of the support systems. That this is the sort of a critical issue, because what I think makes entrepreneurship work, in addition to having some sort of also the sort of social protections for entrepreneurs that you do for more formal workers, is actually that it is something that is providing you with actual valuable income. So it becomes valuable to someone if you actually can make the income and control the income, which is important for how you're viewed in your family and community, and that you have that sort of dignity of that job. So for entrepreneurship is a wonderful gateway and an opportunity, and increasing access to digital information globally will give more people more access to building entrepreneurial schemes. So if you can build, again, some sort of social protections for that, and also ensure that what's happening is that these are not, that people are actually creating real money and respect and controlling the money, then I think there's a real power. But all entrepreneurship is not alike, I guess, is what we're all saying, and it requires a lot of different things in different spaces.
Sorry.
Just one quick thing, but the other part for us also, the entrepreneurship is also and we were speaking a bit about the bargaining power. The power of the collective in India is actually huge. So working with women collective can actually be very interesting, and to make sure that we integrate this collective into organized value chain at some point. So working with farmer producer organization, cooperative and other, but making sure that they can get the right value for their product and for their work. This is something that could be quite interesting and has a huge potential in India to do so.
Very quickly.
So in that direction only, what we are doing is we are looking at lots of women entrepreneurs who can be our suppliers for our provisions, like the raw material which buy right from vegetable, egg, meat to anything. And currently we have around 30% of our suppliers who are women. The sad part of it is some of them are just dummy entrepreneurs. The business is run by their husbands, but they are having the name of, the company is registered in their name. And then below that, the entire workforce is again that same stereotype, men folks not understanding the importance of diversity and inclusion. So that's the area where we need to work. Then we are also working in some parts of the country wherein there are some women who have been abandoned by the society for HIV or because they were sex workers and all. So we have created a kitchen where we have trained them, come learn how to cook, and then do your food production here and go sell in the market. So these kind of initiatives are encouraging for the women who want to get into entrepreneurship or self-employment. So that's what is our contribution, which we are doing in across the world. But I thought that I'll give 2 examples from India. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have one more question, but I thought I'll keep that for the end, and we could open the floor for questions right now, and then the last closing question I'll ask the speakers again. You want to go first?
So in the morning, in the previous session also, and also I saw a very interesting video. I saw a very interesting video on bathrooms. So when we are using this word gender, like safety, so I want to bring forward why there is no aspect of why we are talking about gender sensitivity, not gender neutrality, okay? And why not gender neutral bathrooms? Why not safe for every women? Women are not homogeneous category, like women are trans women when they when they are working in the informal sectors, they have to access. And when we are talking about women, we are just focusing on the one particular cisgender women who has to access, who need safety, who need everything. What about women who don't fall into the normative standards? And what about why we don't talk about neutrality? Why don't we talk about the safety for people who are non-binary, who are trans, who don't follow the typical gender stereotypes? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions. Here, first.
Thank you. Again, I have, it was the panel, I want to thank from the panel. It was very professional speech, and I learned too much from your speech. I have a question from Sandeep Kumar, because you have experience in HR. We have a labor law in Afghanistan, and the government says it is good for women, and we are thinking it's good because we have in the labor law we have the maternity leave, or after the maternity leave we have the opportunity to have a good environment for the kindergarten, or the leave for the take care to their children, the transportation and other things. But when I heard from the other countries like European, there is the maternity leave or provide to the husband as well. My question is that in Afghanistan, that women have this kind of leave. It is the people or the work employers, they misuse from this privilege for women. They didn't hire women because they thinking they will, especially the married women, and they thinking indirectly that the woman will take leave, and 3 months she did not work, and they want to woman work as a machine for them. Because of that, I think when we want to amendment in the labor law, it's good to have to suggest this leave for women at least for 1 month, to convey the responsibility for the take care of their children. For men, it's good for women, or how some? I want that. Because it's shrinking the workplace for women for hiring. And the other thing, the other point is in our labor law, is wrote that the woman should not hire in mines work in mines, and also in heavy works, and also in night shift. Are you thinking it's limited the place, the environment of work for women, or it's the women, or some women are happy with this? But I thinking that it makes shrink the environment for women and limit their hiring opportunities. Thank you.
We'll take a few more questions, Sandeep, and then we will respond to them.
Sorry if I sound controversial, and I don't know whether there's the space for you, but I feel like saying it. Non-traditional livelihood work. For me, the country that I'm coming from, Ghana, the military, it's an area that the pay is good. You get your accommodation, utilities and everything free, and you have the opportunity of traveling on peacekeeping, and you can make extra monies. My husband is a general in the army. So when I became an active politician, I decided that I would use the space to see how I can support women and push women through. But we have a problem. You see, I see the space as a jungle, and there are many tigers. And for you to survive in, you must also be a tiger. I managed to talk to him to get a lot more young women recruited in the military last year when they were doing the recruitment, because he is the Director General of that space. I picked young women from villages because it was a campaign promise, and I got them to go for the first selection. When he came back home, then I asked, how did it go? He said, you this your gender thing. All of them failed. Why did they fail? Because there was a table that was put there. And he said the table should be lifted from that place to another place. Then all of them went back. Sorry, I spoke my language. He said, you the men, go for the table. Completely out. Because he says, a war? Which man is going to push something out of the way for you, the woman, to pass? So it was all of them, 10 of them, off. Then I started asking for something. In the military, you have the men rising all the way to Lieutenant General. We don't have women. So I asked, why? We don't have women Lieutenant General. And he said, there's an examination that everyone has to write. Years back, women said they would not write that exam. Because if you don't write that exam, you cannot rise to become a Lieutenant General or a Major General. So I started talking to the colonels. I have a mate who is a colonel. I started talking, oh, you see, that exam. So how can we survive in the jungle? Sometimes as we talk and we are asking for our rights, we must also know that certain things go with certain things. To survive, we need to become like them. Whilst we are waiting for the apple to get ripe, to fall down, when we see it ripe, as we are struggling to take a stick to pluck it, we must have the strength and not wait till we create the gender-sensitive markets before everything must go well for us. That is the way I am looking at things. That as we are demanding, we must know that the men are too strong and will not easily give us the space. So we must also look at the other side of the coin and work hard towards that whilst doing this advocacy work. Thank you very much. I know I've sounded controversial,
No, thank you for the controversial comments as well, because I don't think we can have a clear answer for that, but it's always good to put things on table for people to think about. But can we just take 2 or 3 quick questions and then for the panel to answer, because we're running out of time now.
Okay.
Very quick, short questions.
Thank you. I'm Lucky. I'm from Nepal, and I'm here since yesterday. I found the title from vulnerable to valuable job and ecosystem. These are all very, very good title. I'm having this here, and for me, we are working in the trekking industry. That is so-called is vulnerable, adventure. So working on this area, what we have been realized, adventure, vulnerable, is there unless and until you have the knowledge and skill. So once you know, nothing is adventure. Everything is possible. Yeah? And non-traditional livelihood workforce is not women they want. This is what we are desperately want to participate on the development, because we are all equal. We can do, like before, maybe hundreds of years before, there was everything should be done by physically. So the man, they think that women should stay at home, they should do household and things like this. But now, if we press the button, we can fly, flight. We can like this. Even the train or any big trolley or everything. So there is nothing physical things is there. Just give us opportunity to learn the skill and knowledge. So that's what we are looking for. So what I'm finding, creating gender sensitive market is one thing, but for me what I think, if we can provide them skill and knowledge to everybody, I think we should not think about the gender sensitive market or anything, that we can equally do. Thank you so much.
Can we ask this? Sorry, last question and then we move. Sorry, there's something else.
I just wanted to, I really want to respond to the issue that's coming up constantly about mentoring, because underpinning the conversation is an empowered women's workforce towards a gender just market. Now, in international agencies, including the UN, and I'm not aware of anything different, I'd like to know, including the private sector, when you talk about accompaniment, empowerment, rights literacy, etc., where are the women's organizations who for 40 years have actually demonstrated that empowerment journey? Somewhere along the line, there is also a backlash on women's organizations partnering on some of these economic and just reforms and processes, because patriarchy is more a lip service, as has been mentioned yesterday and today. So I would like to know, in the skill development scenario, how do we really leverage the knowledge and the expertise of women's organizations globally by donors, international agencies, etc.
Thank you. Can we have responses from the panel, and then let's see how we are with the time.
Come to me that for labor laws, so I'll take that.
But very quickly, yes.
Yeah, correct.
More than 2
so
minutes.
what I understand, you is talking about Afghanistan labor law. Okay. So so country to country the labor laws are vary, and if you look at India, the government is trying to create lot of space in which the men also participate in parenting. Like they have allowed paternity leave, and they have created creche for irrespective of whether we have female or not. I am not nobody to comment upon government of Afghanistan labor laws. I'll not be the right person to comment upon it. But yes, if you look at 2 things which you talked about, one is around maternity and the other was around working in mines, heavy works, and night shift. So gradually it is changing. Like in India also, you will find that 4 states have already changed the Factories Act so that women can also work at night, right? So not the all out of 29, 4 have already changed the law. Women can work, of course, with some prescriptions on safety and transportation, which is a good step, and tomorrow it can be enlarged to all the states. So that is a good sign. Government is thinking and working on it, and I believe labor law is controlled not only by the government; it is controlled by the employer lobby as well as the union. As she was rightly saying, there is a role the union needs to play in terms of asking for these conducive environments to be created, and a seat on the table by the women folks in the union so that they can voice it out. So that's the way we need to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Clement, do you want to go next because you wanted to?
Yeah,
short of time.
a quick thing on the last question that I've been asked. Actually, as part of the project that we have, we do work with a lot of civil society organizations. They are actually the one that we co-design the project with and for what we are putting on the field. So we work with organizations as SEVA, Mandeshi Bank, Industry, ALIP, all these organizations that are women empowerment actually organizations. And we're actually co-designing with them projects on the ground and evaluating them so we can bring that after that to another level and to the policy. We do work as well with a lot of other organizations in terms of advocacy. One of the best examples that I could give is actually the work that we are doing with Azad, because UNDP is actually participating and has actually sponsored Azad to be able to organize that kind of conference. And this is where we can actually work with all organizations to understand better what are the main aspects and try to bring that after that to more at the policy level.
Some of the questions or comments also, so you can respond to them, but also if because of short of time, one being very brief, secondly also if you can do like a wrap-up response, because that was my last question in terms of what is that, whether in one sentence, if after you responding to the comments is one wish, one question or one concern you have to engage women in an equal and gender sensitive way in gender sensitive markets. So if you could wrap up with that, that will then, we will be okay with time, but just in one sentence at the end.
My comment is to the last question, just to continue on that. The work that we do at Win-Win Strategies is really very much in trying to recognize and that the value that local women's organizations, grassroots women's organizations, these organizations that are really gender experts in local context, bring to the conversations around women's empowerment, women's economic empowerment, that when you have companies working globally, and how critical it is to get those gender experts and voices in. And we work really to try to help those organizations build sort of strategies that work for them, that are meaningful corporate engagement strategies, and help them understand their value in those settings. And we work with companies to help them understand a very nuanced, rights-based approach to economic empowerment that talks about the issues that can be relevant in any context, whether it's unpaid care or reproductive health or violence. All those things are critical. My feeling is that cross-sector ecosystem approaches, this is my last thing, are really what is going to be critical to actually create both more gender-sensitive governments, markets, and can ensure that the civil society space is very powerful. And I just finally want to say, I take your point about trends. It's a critical issue, and all of us need to be better gender neutral. Okay, but being gender neutral, this is a huge issue in the U.S. at the moment, and actually the corporate sector is being far more progressive in this setting than our government, which is a disaster, as we all know. But I want not to end on that bad note. I do think there is a lot of opportunity with a lot of different voices in the room, and that's why I think settings like this are extremely valuable.
Okay. Okay, so I wanted to respond to the question on paternity leave. I mentioned a few things on this before, but the fact of it being compulsory is one thing that I think is important. But if it's not compulsory, what we have seen is that men generally will only take 2 weeks maximum, of course, because they don't want to jeopardize their career. But what we have seen is that when men do take paternity leave, the wages of the women go up. And this is something that's important because there is, some of you may have heard of, a motherhood penalty, where women who have children are also paid less, even less than women who do not have children. So I wanted to just make that point and that importance. I think that what is critical is that the workplace is changing for sure, but that we all take a stance against the 24/7 mentality of being accessible all the time, and and we take a position that this is not acceptable, because if we are going to, I think we need to trade this idea for increased flexibility, but with compensating by increased productivity. So if we continue to be productive and we are given flexibility, then we will show that we do not need 24/7 workplace, and then flexi for all would be one thing. And the final comment that I just wanted to make is, and I've said it a little bit before, and it's been mentioned this morning, but I think that we can't underestimate also the power questions in the household. And women, mothers in particular, tend to take a lot of power from their role as the carer. And this is something that's quite sensitive, but I think that we need to, as women, say, we will give up some of that power in order to have more equality and in order for the system to change. And so we have to take off our supermom hat and say, we don't have to do absolutely everything, work and care and everything, but we can leave some space for the men to fill. That was my last comment. Thank you very much.
I would respond in general. I do agree about the terms and word. At the same time, I think it's also go beyond gender, because we have people who are having different in terms of sex, race, physical, age. So it should be actually sensitive to those diversity, because some people don't born with a very physical strength. Why can't we be sensitive to those also, and respect and recognize that what are the contributions and potential that each and individual of us can contribute to this kind of like world beyond economy, but looking at how do we create a well-being for all, and sensitive, respect the uniqueness that we have, and sensitive to diversity. So and we can do that unless we have the participation of those people in the decision making. So when women are not able to get what they need and demand, because we are not there to decide. Some people said that they know better than us. But I would say that we know our need and our condition better than anyone. We should have a say. We should be there. And aside from that, there are people from indigenous, so they should also be there to decide. There are people with disability. They should be there to decide. Because even women participation, we also sometimes blind to other sensitivity. For example, indigenous people from different race, from different skin color, from different ability that we can make, are not being heard their voice and their need too. So I think it's very important to actually recognize that all of us are different. How can we create the whatever economy or social condition or political in a way that recognize that and sensitive to that diversity? So then we can come to a point that we don't have to raise the question about who should be in and who should be out. Why can we make this form and not that form? If all of us being part of it, I'm sure that we would be able to raise our voice and sensitive to those things. So, and then value whatever we do. Because I'm afraid that if I'm good in art, I'm not going to cut my head and hand to become engineer. Because engineer would pay it more than art. This is very, very difficult. But respect that and value that beyond money. So I think that's my last word.
Yes. Very quickly, if I could, talk about the comment before I get to the statement. So, the experience that was shared from Ghana was actually absolutely fascinating for me, and I think it might be controversial, but I think it's central. The way I read it is that there was effort which was placed to open up a space where women usually don't go. But once it was opened up, we nevertheless found that it's a male-dominated space. And and then formally, for all kind of purposes, it sort of still remains close to women, and therefore you say that there's a need for women to back it. And I'm fascinated by that term, and I do think that there's a big need for women to back these closed spaces or these open spaces that are in any way kind of closed. My only personal kind of trouble with that is that this process of backing it is actually a really painful, laborious, burdensome kind of process, because you get called 1,000 things in your own politics. You can be very lonely. It's very tiring, etc. But I think it still needs to be done. This brings me to the wish. My wish is that women do back the market, women back the state, they back their family or whatever, but in that, the burnout, the pain, the costs is less theirs and more of other people. We need to shift out the costs of this backing it. And if we can do that I think would be a great win.
Sandeep, do you have any wish, query, or a question? Last, just one very quick in one sentence.
Addressing to your query that why we are not having gender neutral. So my wish is, like in my home, I don't have specific toilet for my daughter and for my son. So my wish is entire world should be like that, right?
Thank you. I'm sure we all have our wish, and we could share that during the lunchtime, but I'm getting reminders that I'm eating into your lunchtime. So though I had a wish to also summarize it, we don't have much time for that. But if I could also take the opportunity to say my wish, and I think my wish would be what Hope said in the earlier session, that workplaces need to be more than gender sensitive. They need to be happy places. They need to be workspaces which have a soul and which honor everybody who's there. So that is my wish, and I would like to end on that. But thank you very much to the speakers. It's been a very, very enriching discussion. Thank you to everyone.
You have summed it very well. Actually, what we need is the soulful workplaces. So if it can happen, that would be wonderful. So it will be also from vulnerable to valuable in that sense. So with lots of money, of course. Also with happiness. So thank you so much, Sumedha, and the entire panel for such an engaging discussion. Okay. So please, I would request the panel to accept the token of appreciation from us. So meanwhile, I just want to make a couple of more announcements. So we will be breaking for lunch. Which is about engaging with men, creating mutually enabling alliances, I'm moderating